Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a comedy movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Rise of the Fellowship, also known as The Fellows Hip Rise of the Gamers. Now despite the cover, don't let this fool you, this isn't actually a fancy movie, it's actually a kind of more of a coming of age story based in kind of modern America, a la sort of American Pie, that kind of thing. But the unique selling point here is kind of based on sort of geek and nerd culture. And it follows the sort of misadventures of a small group of friends who are kind of being persecuted by the sort of group of bullies who are meant to be the same age but actually look about 10 years older, and it's sort of disapproving family members. One of the lads kind of gets sort of framed for having some drugs by this sort of group of bullies ultimately, and they decide the way to redeem themselves is to actually end this sort of Lord of the Rings online computer game sort of championship, and this is going to be the sort of the answer to all their worries basically. And they sort of decide to obviously band together and sort of go into this sort of championship and have this sort of a few sort of misadventures along the way, and ultimately all's going to be better as they sort of power through this sort of competition, ultimately sort of come out the victors and discover the meaning of friendship and true love at the end of the day. Now the main problem with this movie is it is a very, very cliche. We've actually seen this type of film probably 100 times before. And really it's just a kind of, it's a relatively small scale film, and a lot of people have compared it to another movie called Zero Charisma, which was another film which was kind of based on kind of a geek culture thing. This one was more based on sort of tabletop gaming. But I have to say, if you compare this movie, I would say there's a film called Noobs, which is pretty much exactly the same plot, apart from it's a Gears of War tournament rather than a kind of Lord of the Rings online tournament. But other than that, it's pretty much the same movie. I'd also liken it to another film called Game is the Hands of Fate, which was, once again, it's another sort of tournament movie with the kind of group of underdogs ultimately in this sort of collectible card game tournament, a bit like Magic the Gathering. And it also reminds me of the movie Fanboys, which is kind of a kind of American Pie take on sort of Star Wars culture. So the main problem with this movie is that it really doesn't have anything sort of new to add to this sort of subgenre, I suppose. Everything that you think is going to happen in this movie will happen. There's literally no surprises whatsoever. So the actual plot and the story, and even the actual characters themselves, are all very, very lackluster. And there's nothing really memorable about any of them or anything in the story. The actual characters themselves, I have to say, this film maybe skew a little bit younger than the previous films I've mentioned. The protagonists really seem to be a little bit younger. The humour is maybe a little bit more sort of juvenile. Not necessarily it's necessarily bad, it's just aimed at a younger audience. So I guess younger people may get sort of a bit more from this than sort of a slightly older crowd, I would say. And one thing I do want to sort of mention is the acting. Now I've seen people praise the acting in this film, but I have to say it's almost, when you watch the acting, it almost looks like they're kind of self-parodying themselves. And I have to say, I don't think that was the idea, but it's very kind of overacting, very sort of cheesy. I get the impression it's probably not sort of professional actors ultimately, but it does come across as a little bit wooden and kind of just a bit odd when you're watching, and so it takes you out of it. I have to say, they kind of the people they cast kind of look the part. I will say that they look like genuine kind of like nerdy kids and things like that. So you have that sort of look, I suppose, but the way they sort of just come across on screen, I don't think is a particularly good ultimately. And the film, unfortunately, just isn't a particularly interesting movie. The one thing I did like about this film, this is more of a technical thing more than anything else, is the kind of the way some of the sort of shots are put together, and the sort of framing that they use. They'll kind of splice sort of footage with this sort of Lord of the Rings online game, and along with kind of like having it in almost like comic book panels here. And then I quite like that. I thought that looked quite effective. And I think maybe if you are a fan of this Lord of the Rings online game, or just sort of online gaming in general, you may get a little bit out of it. Like I said, I do believe this movie is maybe skewed at a little bit of a younger audience. So again, if you're kind of a bit of a younger gamer, you kind of may sort of get a bit more out of it, because ultimately you've probably not seen this sort of story told like a million times before, like the rest of us have. But ultimately, it certainly wasn't a complete car wreck of a film, but there was nothing memorable about this movie, in my opinion. It kind of fell short in regards to the term, in terms of comedy. Like I said, it just seemed a little bit juvenile. and there was no really interesting characters. The story wasn't memorable. So I'm going to have to give this one a 4 out of 10. Subpar in my opinion. Not a bad film, but nothing sort of to make it stand out from the crowd. Have you seen it? Let me know what your thoughts are. Leave me a comment. I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.